Hi everybody. Today I am here to talk about caregiver stress and to share 6 reasons that being a caregiver is one of the most stressful jobs that you could ever accept. Caregiving is filled with so many stressful events that include death and relationships and work and other aspects of life that it can be quite challenging. And so one way that I can put caregiving and all of these stressful things into perspective is to look at the idea of being diagnosed with a chronic disease. And then I'm going to take you through these 6 reasons that, honestly, being a caregiver is one of the most stressful things that you can do, and why it's important to make time to care for yourself. So stay with me. I'm Pamela D Wilson. I'm a caregiving expert, advocate, and speaker. Information about me is linked below, links to my website, my online programs, my podcast videos, a lot of other information. Please like this video, follow my channel so that other people can find their way here. So let's look at chronic disease. So chronic disease is a diagnosis that you have like high blood pressure, diabetes, COPD, maybe you have arthritis, maybe you have a lot of chronic pain due to some type of an injury. It's a health problem that just stays with you, kind of like something that just never goes away. And it can get worse, or if you're proactive, it can be manageable or maybe get better. But really, it's just this thing that's an ongoing hassle that you are diagnosed with and you have for the rest of your life. So normally, when people receive a diagnosis, they may not take it very seriously, which is why as that caregiver, no matter what your age, it's important to take your health seriously because these things get worse. So somebody has a diagnosis of high blood pressure and they think, oh, you know, it's not that bad. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to take pills, not going to listen to the doctor. And then years later, you have a heart attack or you have a stroke or something else happens. So kind of like loved ones that caregivers take care of who need help. It's like, oh, I don't need that much help. I'm okay. Sometimes we're in denial. We don't think of the consequences. Same thing with being diagnosed with a chronic disease. And so if we're talking about high blood pressure for a minute, some questions people might ask would be like, well, why didn't I notice this? How did I have high blood pressure? I feel perfectly fine. And what can I do about it? When might this have started? Why didn't I notice it before? How do I deal with this? What are the consequences? What am I supposed to do? Because anybody can have high blood pressure and not even know it. Now, how do you know? You take your blood pressure. What if you don't have one of those blood pressure cuffs? Some in-store pharmacies have these little chairs where you put your arm in a machine and it reads your blood pressure. If you do that and it's higher than 120/80, you might have high blood pressure. Go see your doctor. Go for an annual checkup. For caregivers, being proactive with any little health diagnosis is good for you because it offers the opportunity to be able to be proactive, change, manage, or improve that situation. On the other hand, being in denial, saying, it's not a big thing, I'm not going to worry about it, it's going to cause problems later. Similar to the person that you may be caring for. So let's move ahead and go to the number 1 worst stressful event for caregivers. It is the end of caregiving. It is death. Death is the most stressful event in life. So I'm going to share my little story called I Don't Do Funerals. My first funeral was with my grandfather when I was 5 years old. I remember my mother taking me to the funeral home. And back then I really didn't know much about death. I didn't know anything about death. Honestly, at 5 years old, what do you know? But what I remember very much to the last detail was my mother walking me up to my grandfather's coffin, and we were Catholic, so we got on the kneeler. And she said, stand up, it's okay, go ahead and touch Grandpa's hand, which I did, and it was cold. But, you know, at that age, it was Grandpa, and he wasn't there anymore, and I didn't realize all the grieving that my mother was going through. So it kind of just went through, but I do remember it. And then I attended Catholic grade school, so I had to be on the choir, and we had to go to weddings and funerals all the time. Again, didn't mean a lot to me because it wasn't personal. Death did not strike me personally until my sister died in a car accident. She was 29, I was 17 at the time. That hit me because I spoke to her just the morning before she took off in her car, and then 6 hours later, she was gone. My mother died 18 years after my sister. That was an emotional experience. And every funeral, including hers that I attended after that, brought back the trauma of my mother's funeral. And so after that, I'm just like, you know what, I'm done. I'm not going to any more funerals. And I have a lot of friends that say that. Well, my father died a few years after that. The benefit of going through that with my mother and my sister was that I kind of knew how I would feel and what the experience would feel like. And I don't think people ever get over losing loved ones. I don't think death ever gets easier. But at that point, I decided to change careers and starting a caregiving career, helping older people and helping people through losses. And so through that personal experience, I learned that being with people in the final stages of their life wasn't as frightening as I imagined. I wasn't with my sister when she was killed in the car accident. I wasn't with my mother when she died. I was not with my father when he died. I have been with clients when they died. In many of these situations, though, hospice was involved for my clients. And hospice workers are the most amazing people in life. And I learned that death doesn't have to be painful, that it can be peaceful and calm. And even though I still cry at funerals today, I've learned that attending a funeral is a way to show respect for the life of the person who passed away, but also to support their loved ones and their families. I still think about my parents and my sister and my brother and my aunts and uncles and grandparents who have passed away, but those memories kind of become a little softer with time, and I try to think of the good things rather than the end of their life or things like that. So death is a very stressful experience for caregivers. And the problem is before that event, you're going through years and years and years and years of caregiving work. Now, sometimes it's the caregiver that actually dies before the person that they're caring for. There are statistics all over the board out there. 30 to 60%. Caregivers dying before non-caregivers. Spouse caregivers dying before the spouse that they care for. Caregivers dying before the person that they care for who has dementia. It's all over the board. And the high rates really are attributed to stress. So as a caregiver, it's important to take care of yourself. It's important to have a backup plan for what if you get sick. What happens if you unexpectedly die tomorrow? Who is going to care for your loved one? The number 2 most stressful experience in life is the death of a spouse. So becoming this caregiver of a spouse can result in a lot of loss, right? Your spouse dies, you lose your spouse. You have to rebuild your life. And before you even get to the death of a spouse, it's a lot of events that can change your daily life. You may give up a job to care for a spouse at home. You may give up all of your retirement dreams. You may spend all of your money on care for a sick spouse. And then you've got the grieving part. Sometimes you can grieve before you actually lose somebody, especially if they have Alzheimer's or dementia, because you're not really seeing the person that they were. You can remember the person that they were, but Alzheimer's and dementia totally change a person's personality and their abilities. And then after you lose someone, you grieve. There are numbers out there saying that it takes 1 month for every year that you were married to grieve the loss of a spouse. So if you were married 10 years, that could take 10 months of grieving or even longer. Grieving is a very individual situation for people. And I want to talk about spousal suicide. So for those of you who are a spouse, or if you're adult children caring for your parents, spousal suicide is a very serious concern, and it happens. It can happen when a couple has been together for a long time, according to, again, studies. Suicide rates are the highest in the first week following the loss, with more men than women actually committing suicide in the older adult population by about 3 to 4 times as many. And for younger adults, that suicide rate is equal. Now, in my family, my mother passed away before my father. My father was extremely, extremely depressed. He called me one day and told me how he was going to commit suicide. But what stopped him was the thought of having his children find him dead. So he called me. And I was able to get my sister involved, and we got him help. We got him on depression medications, and he lived another 3 to 4 years and had a really, really good life. So death is very, very stressful for caregivers and the years leading up to it. Then let's say you're the caregiver and you are caregiver for a spouse, or you're married and you're caring for your parents or your spouse's parents, all of that. The stress of being married is stressful, especially if you're taking care of parents and children, parents and in-laws and children. Very difficult. Then combined with all of this marital stress is sometimes couples will get separated, sometimes divorce happens, they get separated, they get back together. All of this is very stressful. And during my years of caregiving and counseling family caregivers and couples, I have seen caring for aging parents really take a toll on couples, because sometimes the focus to the exclusion of the marriage is a parent. And while a child thinks, I'm doing the best I can, I have to do this, it's my duty, it's my responsibility, the marriage over here suffers. And it can result in a separation or a divorce. And then in some situations, there's a healthy spouse who's going through the loss and the grief of caring for a spouse. And sometimes, depending on the duration of the illness or the sickness, maybe it's been 20 years in a marriage and it's not going to get better, I have seen those couples get divorced because of health problems that are going to go on and on and on, and the caregiving spouse just says, I can't do this anymore. Love you, but I can't do it anymore. Then there are remarriages or later in life marriages. So I had a married couple who were married before and they got married, and the husband all of a sudden was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And the wife, after only 3 months of marriage, said, I can't do this. I just took care of my husband, my prior husband, who died from Alzheimer's. I can't go through this again. I'm done. And they divorced, and his children took care of him. So there's all kinds of marital situations that happen when caregiving affects the people in the marriage and the couple who are taking care of parents. The third most stressful situation for caregivers is injury or personal illness. So until one has an accident or a diagnosis of a chronic disease that gets worse, we think that we are just invincible, that life is great, that we're healthy and we can fend off little colds and things, and we just recover like that, recover quickly, right? But if you're injured, if you're in a car accident, if you are in some type of a sporting accident and you're used to being active, this can throw a wrench in your life and a wrench in all of your plans. People who have high-risk jobs like construction workers and firemen and women and policemen and women a lot of times have a lot of injuries. And these injuries or health issues cross over into everything. Family relationships, the ability to work, to go to school, to perform your daily activities, and they really can do a number on the mind up here, especially if you're physically active and your physical activity feeds your mind and your positivity and your energy and all of that. On my website and on this channel here, there's a video called Eat Cookies. I'll put a link to it below. True story about a very active bodybuilder that lived here in Denver, Colorado. And one day he accidentally was sitting on a retaining wall and he fell off backward and had a head injury and neck injury. And it resulted in him being a quadriplegic. He was totally paralyzed. He really relied on a breathing machine, on a feeding tube, all of that. And the video shares his story of telling people to make sure that you have your medical power of attorney in place and your financial power of attorney in place and your living will about what you want to happen if you are in such a tragic accident. He didn't. And so his advice is in that video. So the number 4th most stressful event for caregivers is having a job and being a caregiver, an unpaid caregiver. An example of a caregiver concern is, gosh, I'm going to get fired. I'm worried about keeping my job. I'm worried about being passed over for a promotion or being put in a lesser position because I can't show up all the time. I have to take time off work to do all this. Being fired is stressful. Worrying about losing your job is stressful. So caregivers who care for elderly parents and spouses, and even if you're caring for yourself, some days you have a doctor appointment, you come in late, you leave early, or you have a procedure or something else that you have to do, and you take time off either to care for yourself or an elderly parent. And there's great fear about letting all of this be known in the workplace. Now, isn't that in contrast to parents who have children? And they gladly talk about, oh, you know what, I'm leaving early to go to my child's baseball game, or I've got to take the kids here, or I've got to take the kids there. Why is that so different than saying, wow, my parents are sick and I've got to go do this and I've got to go do that? It's the difference between a life filled with potential and a life that there's a lot of health problems and other issues, and it probably isn't going to get better. Another stressful event for caregivers and for people of all ages, believe it or not, is retirement. Early retirement. It's not always planned. It's rarely planned. We think we're going to work until we're 60, 65, 70. Maybe some of us are never going to stop working. That personal injury that I mentioned earlier, or some kind of illness, cancer diagnosis, broken leg, car accident, head injury, can result in midlife disability. And midlife disabilities happen more for women than they do for men. But women continue to work. Men who suffer midlife disabilities, if they're a construction worker or a police person or a fire person, they can be pretty serious. And then that working spouse takes off work to take care of them. Family income suffers. There's all this stress from unexpected health problems. I'm going to put a link below to a podcast. It was actually my podcast number 6. I just posted 197. So it's called Managing Work-Life Balance. And on there is a guest I interviewed, Dr. Carrie Carbonen-Gutierrez. She has done research on midlife health concerns for women, and she speaks of disability in a non-traditional way and how this affects women's health and their ability to continue to work and their outlook on life. So the link below is if you want to check that out. The last stressful event that I'm going to talk about for caregivers, and I call this one gaining a new family member. So you're a couple, you're married, maybe you're single, taking care of yourself. And all of a sudden, somebody over here, mom, dad, a sister, a brother, a friend, an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, somebody needs help. And you have your family planned. You're single, your life is planned, you're doing all this stuff. Maybe you're married, you've got your husband or wife, that's your family. Or you're married and you have kids, that's your family. But now, all of a sudden, you have this other family member who wants and expects you to be responsible for them. That is caregiving. Now, what do? A lot of adult children will jump in and start to take over and doing things. Some children think, well, should I move my parents closer to us? Should we move them into our house? Should we move into their house? That is a huge decision to make. I have videos here on my channel about that. Do not make that decision lightly. Do not make it quickly because there are so many consequences, good and bad. Remember, there's both sides to every story. But as you can see through these examples, caregiving is a job. It is work. It can be never ending. It can feel like it never ends. You can be a caregiver for children who are 2 years old and a caregiver for a parent who is 65 years old. You're a caregiver for that 2-year-old until they're 18 at least, sometimes 21 and older. You could be a caregiver for a 65-year-old parent to 75, 85, and 95. And then in the middle, you're trying to take care of yourself and your spouse and work and do all these other things. So as you can see, the job of caregivers crosses over into so many areas of life that we may not think about until we are the caregiver and we feel like we are stuck in the middle of all these outside pressures. And everything else out here just keeps moving, right? So it's never too early to talk about caring for elderly parents, how you're going to manage this, how you as spouses are going to care for each other, what you expect of your children. Do you expect your children to take care of you? And one of the most important tools in all of this, as I mentioned, is your health. It's your mental health. It's how you think up here. It's your physical health. So what goes on in your mind and your thoughts is really more important than anything that happens out here. Now, the problem is all these things out here constantly come at us, right? Just bombarding us one day after another, one after another. They build up and build up and build up, and we get stressed. And our minds get distracted, and we can't think. And then that has an effect on our body and how we feel and how we sleep, how we eat. Do we eat too much? Do we lose our appetite? So all of this ties together. And so from this health perspective, if you're positive and you're thinking good things and you are healthy and you're strong, you're more able to manage through these caregiving challenges, which is why caregivers, in my opinion, cannot place their health or their well-being at the bottom of the pile. That eventually is going to have an effect on you. Remember those statistics that I cited earlier? Caregivers die before the people that they care for. Caregivers have more health problems than non-caregivers. It's important to take care of yourself, to find ways to do that, to hold yourself accountable to do that. So I thank you so much for being here to be with me to talk about all of these stressful events and how they affect life, and the fact that taking care of yourself is your best response to stress. I'm Pamela D Wilson again. For more information on me, my website, helpful information, go below. Please like, follow, comment below for this video. It helps other people find their way here. Your participation really does make a big difference. I'll see you all again soon in another video. Thanks for being here.